And now we are live on Facebook as well. And we're recording. And we got folks joining us. I'll give it, hi everyone. Just give us a minute. I'll give it 1 minute or two for a few more folks to join, and then we're going to get going. We're live on Facebook. We're here. We're unveiling the people's budget, and we are so excited about this. Okay, let's see. We have a great panel with us today as well. Okay, I'm just going to start. Looks like we've reached a critical mass of the folks who registered, so we might as well just get going. Everyone who, if you're seeing this on Facebook, feel free to share it out far and wide. We want to get the word out about this project that we're really, really excited about. And for members of the media, thank you so much for joining us and covering this event. We think this is kind of marking, a new day for Ohio. So I'll first introduce myself. I'm Caitlin Johnson. I am the Communications Director of Policy Matters Ohio, and I'm going to be moderating the press call today. And we are here, like I said, to unveil the people's budget. So over the past year, we have seen how Ohioans can come together and take care of each other, whether it's neighbors distributing face masks in our community or donating to the local food pantry, or our government deploying critical resources to make sure people who are laid off can make ends meet and stay in their homes. COVID has been a great reminder that we are all connected and that our government works best when it works for all the people, not just the wealthy few. Now, Governor Mike Dewine's 2022-23 state budget proposal largely continues the failed policies of the last 15 years. The American Rescue Plan signed by President Biden will help us get back on our feet, but Ohio can't return to the failed trickle-down policies of the past 2 decades. And that's why Policy Matters Ohio and the Ohio Organizing Collaborative have come together to craft All In for Ohio's People's Budget. We envision a state budget that reflects our values and directs our resources in ways that care for all of us. The People's Budget makes 7 simple demands of our state lawmakers: for quality education, safe communities, economic dignity, care for caregivers, stability for our families, a working healthcare system, and funding our lives. And you can see our full People's Budget and all of our policy recommendations at allinforohio.com/peoples-budget. Today, we're joined by community leaders and elected officials who share in that vision. So first, we're going to hear from Policy Matters Ohio's Senior Project Director, Wendy Patton, and she's going to describe the state policy context and why we need a people's budget and why now is the time for a people's budget. And next, you'll hear from State Rep Stephanie House of Cleveland, who will give her perspective as a lawmaker fighting for racial and gender equity. Then you'll hear from Portage County Treasurer Brad Cromes, and he will explain why we need a state revenue system that better meets communities' needs. Then you'll hear from Kalisha Scott of Dayton. She's an organizer with the Ohio Student Association, and she will discuss the need for better childcare funding and prioritizing infant and maternal health. Then Tia Ferguson of Columbus, an OOC leader, and she's going to discuss the importance of making sure all families have enough to make ends meet and access to excellent public schools. And finally, Aki Butler of Youngstown and Columbus, also an Ohio Student Association organizer. And he's going to talk about how state lawmakers can build a brighter future for Ohio by removing barriers to education. So for members of the press, please type your questions in the Q&A and I can read them at the end of the program. Or when our panelists are done, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. If you're watching on social media and you'd like to comment or ask a question, just type it in the Facebook comments or tweet at us and we will try to get to you as well. And with nothing further from me, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you, Caitlin. I'm Wendy Patton with Policy Matters Ohio. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. For 15 years, the problem in the state of Ohio has been too often insufficient funding and too often policies that work against too many Ohioans. I'm sure our audience Our panelists were all well aware that our school funding system is unconstitutional and has been without a fix for 23 years. Local communities pay the lion's share of school financing, which means wealthier districts have great education, and districts that aren't so wealthy may struggle to have adequate education, although the Constitution says it is the responsibility of the state to provide a good school for all students. As a matter of fact, over-reliance on local resources leaves many communities struggling in many areas. What's less well known is that in Ohio, the lion's share of funding for critical human services is borne by the local community. Public health, adult protective services, child protective services, public transit. In Ohio, we rely on local funding for domestic violence services, which means in some communities there may be services, and in other communities there just aren't. The state's over-reliance on local communities has been supplemented in the past by revenue-sharing funds. In the last 10 years, those revenue-sharing funds were cut in half. Local governments faced a loss of $1 billion every year in state funding. Communities struggle. The state also underinvests in its own systems. When the pandemic recession hit and millions of Ohioans lost their jobs, lost hours, and turned to the unemployment compensation system, that system had been neglected for so long that it couldn't hold up under the onslaught of need, and many people waited for months to get checks that they desperately needed to buy food and pay rent. This is a problem of underinvestment. This is a problem that can be fixed by the state legislature. The Ohio Partnership for Public Health identified a funding gap of $93 million a year in local public health agency capacity and capability in 2019, the year before the pandemic hit. And within months, when the pandemic hit, Governor Dewine was decrying our long-term underinvestment in public health that hampered coordination and response to the pandemic. As a matter of fact, this terrible year of pandemic and recession has really highlighted the erosion of so many important public systems that keep us going in good times and in bad times. The cracks in the system, like inadequate broadband, so many children dependent on online learning had no access to wireless and lost a year of education. Historical discrimination in housing, in employment, and other governmental policies hit the Black, brown, and indigenous communities of color the hardest and took the heaviest toll of the pandemic. Now, the American Rescue Plan will help a lot. It shows us how government works best when it works for all people. And if used correctly, it can start to repair damage in communities of color, lost education in schools. It gives us a chance to reset and to start to rebuild. However, the American Rescue Plan funds, badly needed from this very difficult place that we're in right now, are one-time money. They're a one-time shot. What we need is a commitment to a budget that supports all people and a sustained effort for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Now we're going to hear from Representative House, who has been fighting for these issues on the front lines.
Well, good morning, everyone. Again, let me just first start off by just thanking Policy Matters Ohio and OOC for putting this together, really centering people during this time. When I think about having a people's budget, for me, it really is about being flexible, paying attention for one, but being flexible enough to make the adjustments necessary at the time when people actually really need it. So what did that look like? I would always first and foremost say where we have been dealing in this last year with the two pandemics, COVID-19. And of course, when people talk about America's original sin, that of racism, declaring racism as a public health crisis is needed more now than any time ever. As Wendy shared, we know about the discrepancies and the disparities that we see in our society when it comes to Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And by having a state government lead the way to show that we could be on the forefront of what it looks like to really lifting up racial equity and social justice. At this time now, we're hearing the chants around Stop AAPI Hate, right? There are some of us who are really supporting this idea of creating an AAPI commission here in Ohio so we can better understand our brothers and sisters within our AAPI community and be able to serve them. That's what a people's budget does, right? You don't just let someone else do it. You take on that responsibility for yourself. As we look at this month being Minority Health Month, we always would have to think about the maternal and infant disparities that we have here in the state of Ohio. That's one of the reasons why I am a proud member of those, excuse me, of Ohio's Black Maternal Health Caucus, which is really focusing on delivering access to safe, quality, and equitable health care to all Ohioans, specifically focusing on our mothers and our babies. What does that look like in policy? In this current General Assembly, we are definitely supporting the Save Our Mothers Act. This is a policy to really improve the reporting and training of our healthcare providers, as well as making sure that hopefully we can finally fund and reimburse those families who are interested in doula services so that they can have, safe and healthy pregnancies and the support they need during just such a precious moment during their lives. Beyond that, I know we talked about what does a people's budget look like? So you go from racism, we're talking about healthcare. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about education. Education is one of those things that really is supposed to be the launch pad that help people to truly live in our economy. And when we think about a promise of brighter lives, better lives, and brighter futures, education is centered to that. Wendy talked about how we know how unconstitutionally we fund our schools. And so, having a people's budget that truly looks at coming up, which hopefully now House Bill 1, it's currently, is being discussed, and hopefully we can get it passed in this General Assembly. But the key points in this is coming up with a base funding for what does it actually cost to educate a child in Ohio. We're looking at the social and emotional needs. You're looking from the after school programs, technology as it is ever evolving. And really, we want to make sure that our babies in Ohio really are just going to be able to have a great educational experience, to be in a position to come back and have all of their greatness and talents there. And finally, I would, like I said, would be remiss if I don't give a shout out to just our federal partners in the passage of the American Rescue Plan. Also, as Wendy talked about, this is the budget, it's one-time funding, but the thing about it is we have to be in a place that we are centering people. When we look at what does this really mean to average Ohioans, we are talking about economic assistance, right? $1,400 for Ohioans and dependents. That's real money to help with the things that they need. We're talking about rental assistance. We're talking about childcare. And then there's a lot of investment that's going into our state and local communities, a lot of local communities, which really have not been getting their fair share. So I'm going to stop right there because I know we want to hear from the rest of our panelists. But again, we have a ways to go. And I just know that collectively, if Ohioans work together, we can have government that works for us. And so again, I just want to thank OOC and Policy Matters for bringing us for this press conference today. So I'll turn it back to you, Caitlin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, now we're going to hear from Brad Cromus. He is the Portage County Treasurer, and he's going to give us a perspective from his community.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. And I want to echo what Rep. House said in terms of thanking Policy Matters Ohio and OOC for bringing us together to have this conversation today. It is so important that we have a budget in the state of Ohio that centers people and the communities that state government is supposed to serve, right? And when I'm thinking about what a people's budget means for my community, I think about what a game changer and a lifesaver having a fair state budget and a tax system that is fair would mean for families like mine. I grew up in a community in rural Ohio with a mom and dad who fought hard to ensure that I had opportunities that they didn't. My mom was a social worker, and my dad at various points has been a warehouse worker and a farmer and a mechanic and a construction worker and a carpenter and a bunch of other things. But they worked really hard to get ahead. And like too many people, often what they found themselves doing was struggling and treading water. And I know that now as an adult who's had some time to reflect on what kind of creates that condition, right? And as someone who serves in a public finance position, I know that Ohio's broken tax code is part of the story there. The last time that we had a tax system in our state that resembled something like fairness and asking Ohioans to all pay their fair share, I was barely out of diapers. And since then, the inequality in our taxation scheme has only gotten worse. Right now, the poorest Ohioans on average pay nearly twice as much of their income in state and local taxes as the top 1%. Our model in Ohio has meant over time that more and more tax breaks go to the wealthiest and our state's biggest corporations, and fewer resources are available for regular people like my parents and the families here in Portage County and across our state. President Biden, as we're talking about the rescue plan, once famously said, "Don't tell me what you value, show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value." And for most of the past 3 decades, Ohio's budgets have shown over and over again that we value corporate profits and protecting wealth over the people who make Ohio work every day, and that has got to change. That's one of the reasons I'm excited about this people's budget. I think it's a blueprint for how we can get there. As we'd said, the American Rescue Plan is infusing our state with billions of dollars in federal aid aimed at bridging gaps between working Ohioans and the wealthiest. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to change the rules of the economic game so that it's fair for all Ohioans and for our local communities. And this people's budget looks like an Ohio rescue plan in a lot of respects, in that it complements and magnifies that effort by right-sizing our tax burdens and directing resources to the folks who need it to move our state forward, and not just the people at the top. So not to get into it too much, but I do want to flesh out some of these things, right? So our income tax scheme, as we'd said, is I think evidence shows, Wendy's done great work and fleshing out exactly what this looks like, but it's rigged for the richest people in the state. Restoring a tax rate, the top rate, to 7.5% on income over $220,000 like we had in 1992, which was a period of economic boom in the state under a Republican governor, and then adding an additional 1% for folks making more than $500,000 a year. Those top 1%ers would bring some balance back to our code and give us badly needed resources to address problems that we all face. Shrinking the LLC loophole from $250,000 to $100,000 would make it an actual small business deduction and not a frequently exploited out clause for big businesses to use. That change alone would give our state an extra $1 billion to use in the fight to make Ohio stronger for everybody. Rolling back tax breaks and special interests that special interests and lobbyists have put into Ohio law would move more than $9 billion potentially out of the pockets of the richest Ohioans and put them back to work again for regular people, for all of us. And Ohio is one of 6 states, 6 in the country, without any corporate profit tax at all. It's time that corporations in Ohio pay their fair share again. It's just fairness. And bringing back a modest form of the old corporate profit tax would bring at least $500 million into the state budget to put to work for all of us. Most of us in the state, 97%, according to Wendy's research, would be unaffected by these revenue measures, and they would deliver game-changing resources to make life better for everybody. With some of those resources, we can lift up working people by making our state's earned income tax credit more robust and refundable. And with the rest, we should invest in public goods like Rep. House discussed, like others are going to talk about here in just a little bit, to make our educational system stronger, our communities safer, and make sure that all Ohioans have an opportunity to live healthy lives with dignity. It's what we all deserve, and frankly, we should be demanding of our state government. So, and I know that, just kind of wrapping up, that these proposals aren't just going to help families, which is the most important thing, but they're going to help the communities that serve our families too. As it stands right now, as Wendy and Representative House spoke about, the state budget demands that local communities like mine close gaps in state funding when the state pulls back those dollars. And in too many cases, communities just simply can't do it. And that leaves a lot of places in the state behind. It leaves us struggling. And makes us further behind over time. So it's something that we've got to address. Governor DeWine's budget proposal has its good points, but at the end of the day, it's part of the same game plan that we've been running for years and years that has caused our state to fall further and further behind. And this budget is different. The People's Budget proposal that we're talking about today is a vision that offers all Ohio families like the one I grew up in a fresh start and a fair shot at an opportunity. And we know that with an opportunity, Ohioans thrive, and it's time that we make it available for everybody in the state. So again, I just appreciate so much that you guys made this put the work in to put this budget vision together and gave us all a chance to talk about it this morning. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And we appreciate your close read of Policy Matters reports. So I'm going to pass it next to Kalisha, and she's going to give her perspective on maternal health and infant health and childcare funding, I believe.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to thank Representative House and Brad and Wendy for all the things that y'all brought up, especially Representative House bringing up the doula bill. That's one of the biggest things I think that is important about this budget for me specifically. I am currently now 7 months pregnant with my first child. So, and before I did experience some complications in the past, I had a few miscarriages early on in pregnancy. So this pregnancy was very frightening for me, just having to deal with that waiting time of making sure I make it out the first trimester and all of that. But it was even more nerve-wracking because this is my first time being pregnant this long and not knowing what's normal, not knowing is this supposed to be happening, and having to wait, your first 2 trimesters, you go to the hospital every month to see a doctor. And I did look into getting a doula for myself to have that extra support, but it just financially wasn't in the plans. I was trying to buy a home early on in my pregnancy, a car, so it was like an extra $1,000, $2,000 wasn't in my plans to pay for at the time. Because it was more important things going on, like making sure my child has somewhere to live and reliable transportation. So I didn't get a doula early on. About, I say 6 months when I started having more complications that I wasn't used to. I had to just like suck it up, and I did end up finding somebody. And it definitely like was a game changer. Like it was the first time I actually enjoyed my pregnancy, because for the whole time I was just scared about everything. Oh, my legs swollen, do that mean something? And then also in my family, premature birth is very common. My mother, 2 of her kids was premature. My brother's son, he was 1 pound, he was born. So it just was like, that was scary too, making sure I'm making it to the 34, 36 weeks to where they are full term. So it just was it's very scary. And if you don't have nobody that you can call, like, is this normal? Should I be doing this? Should my legs be like this? Should my stomach be moving like this? Like, what's going on? It is hard. So I definitely believe that House bill for the doula, for women to be able to experience that, especially in our community as African Americans, minority communities, because we a lot of times can't afford it. We are the ones that's affected to where we don't have that extra $2,000 to pay a doula. And it's worth it. They not only help you through your pregnancy, but even after you have your child with breastfeeding and different things like that, just making sure that, because that's another fear too, is infant mortality in the first 6 months. So having to do that waiting time of checking your kid every 2 seconds to make sure they're breathing, or making sure that they're just healthy. If it's not just a normal cold, is it something more serious? And if you don't have that experience or have somebody that can be there just to be that calmer or that confidant that has that extra work to like be able to work with you, it is very hard. So I definitely believe that is something that all women, all mothers and fathers specifically can really benefit from, because dads don't know either, and they just sit there and try to be quiet and supportive. But I know it's hard for them too. Like my partner, he'd be like, are you okay? Like, is this normal? So it definitely is beneficial to both parents. And and just childcare in general. Like now, and where I'm from, our average income for my city is about $27,000 on average, and childcare is about $400 a week. So it's just like definitely not affordable. Even with the income, my income is a little higher, but I can't afford $400 a month. And not everybody is blessed like me to have family members like a grandma that don't work anymore, that loves kids and don't care. So it's definitely difficult when you are trying to make a living, go to work, but you're trying to find childcare, you're trying to find somebody you can trust. And it's definitely, it seems like a lot of things is against these minority communities within the state of Ohio. Um, so it's definitely everything that they're trying to improve with infant mortality to childcare, mother mortality with giving birth. I had a few friends that has passed giving birth. So that's another fear of mine as well, from preeclampsia. So it's definitely a lot of things that the minority communities have been experienced over time that is very frightening when you try to bring a child. It's supposed to be the happiest time of your life, but it's so many things that you have to worry about, that you have to pray about if you are spiritual, to make sure that they don't happen. And I definitely believe that some of these bills will help to kind of gauge and bring those numbers down, like they were in the 90s and 80s, where you didn't have mothers passing away, you didn't have babies passing away. And the 2000s, the numbers are just continuously rising. So we definitely need to do something for our mothers, for our children, because we want our society to continue to grow. And that can't happen if mom's not having babies. So that's my piece. I want to again thank everybody for allowing me to be on this call, and thank everybody that came.
Thank you so much, Kalisha, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I know that's not always easy things to talk about, so we really appreciate that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tia Ferguson of Columbus.
Thank you. And before I start, I want to thank Kalisha for sharing that truly powerful story. I want to thank Policy Matters Ohio and the Ohio Organizing Collaborative for the organizing and inviting me to speak today at the People's Budget, because it's true that no matter our differences, what unites us is a desire to have peace of mind that comes from bringing and putting food on our family's table. So just to share a little bit about myself, as a working mom, job opportunities did not afford me to be engaged in my children's education as much as I wanted to be. So by the time my eldest son was in 3rd grade and still reading on a 1st grade level, I made it a purpose to teach my son how to read. In doing so, I became a substitute teacher and entered a graduate school program in early childhood education. As an educator, I learned the valuable of community support, and because you really have to have a community to teach children, to make them grow. But I also know that when I was in high school, the U.S. Supreme Court found Ohio's funding unconstitutional. And I'm not trying to tell my age, but that was over 20 years ago. So much like Ohio school funding, the hierarchy in Ohio and their tax code system in all just devalues hardworking Ohioans. So to give a little bit of background about myself, when you look at me, you're looking at a hardworking Ohioan that went through student teaching without a paycheck, but still got up at 6 a.m. every morning on public transportation to pour into other people's children. You're looking at that mother that came home and still mustered the energy to take care of her own. You're looking at the face of a mother that lost her child at 6 months stillborn. But even though I wasn't ready to go back to work, my financial burden forced me to be ready to go back to work. So that's the woman that you're looking at. So when I see people who are saying that we're not doing our fair share, I wonder if they can see that if my district were able to pay me what my value, if I would have had enough money to be on paid leave and not forced to come back into a situation that I wasn't emotionally prepared for. I wonder if they see that our children need support in and out of the classroom, and that educators financially need support in and out of the classroom, because we're the ones that are pouring into their children every day. I wonder if Ohio's Constitution did what it was supposed to do and fund Ohio schools the way it's supposed to be funded. If over 20 years, a cycle of generation poverty wasn't continuing on with our students. So that's the reason why I'm so excited about the people's budget, because this pandemic showed us that we have a true opportunity to reimagine what Ohio should look like. And with that reimagining, it's not enough just to think about what it should be. Now is the time to put that into action, to wake up, stop reimagining, and do what is needed to be done for all Ohioans. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you so much, Tia. And thank both Tia and Kalisha have just shown in such powerful ways really what's at stake by continuing to do things the way that we've done them, and how we can make a change right now. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Aki Butler, and he is with the Ohio Student Association as well.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aki Butler. Thank you guys so much for having me on this call and on this panel to share my story. I want to give a shout out to everyone who was involved in making this possible, as well as to Tia and Kalisha for sharing your powerful stories. That is something that is very important. So I guess I can start. I think Tia actually hit it on the head when it comes to like the funding of schools. I'm come from Youngstown, Ohio. I was raised there. So during my time in Youngstown, Ohio, I spent, my time in different school systems. The first was Youngstown City Schools, which is, as much as I love the school system, I also knew that it was very, very underfunded. It did not have the funding it needed. There were times when I had to share my school books with other students in class, and we're in elementary school, and so we have to partner up and share books, or we may not have had enough technology in the class. So that was sort of like, my elementary time. However, as I grew up, I changed school systems, and I went to Hubbard Schools, which is in Hubbard, Ohio. And it's funny because I went to a school and I saw what it looked like for a school to be properly funded, for me not to have to share a book, and we had all the technology we needed. And I remember growing up thinking, wow, this is kind of crazy. Like, why is it that this school district can have this, but then this school district can't? So that is definitely something that I felt. And it's crazy because growing up in Youngstown, we all have dreams. Every student has dreams, and I believe every student deserves a chance to follow those dreams and succeed at those dreams. And it's kind of hard when you don't have a state budget that allows for that. So I think that's why it's very important we get this budget going, because this gives us a chance to follow our dreams, succeed at our dreams, and it helps fund our dreams as well. I went to Kent State University and studied journalism because, like I said, growing up in Youngstown, it was a town where, it's looked down upon due to the crime and everything that goes on there. But there's a lot of good that goes on there as well, and it doesn't get shown or talked about. So I had a dream of, I'm going to go to school, become a journalist, and I'm going to shine a light on all the good things here in Youngstown, yes, in the Mahoney Valley. Like, that was something I always wanted to do. And I'm going to school, and my teachers always told me, my teachers and family always say, yeah, go to college, get your education. Go to college, get your education. Education is always something that in my family, it was seen as like, a top priority, and in that community, top priority. But what they didn't prepare me for was the actual cost of that education. So it's almost like, yeah, I'm going to Kent State University to pursue my dreams, but I'm also being punished with the astronomical price of paying for that education to fund my own dream. So like it was just a bit crazy in my opinion. It's like I'm going here, and at one point the financial strain becomes so much because you have to worry about your classes. All the classes are taken. You're like, oh, I got this test, I'm stressed out. But then also the end of the semester is coming up, and you're like, oh my God, I have to have enough money so that I can pay my bill so that I may be able to schedule my classes for next semester. And it gets to a point where you get so financially frustrated and mentally frustrated that a lot of people start, including myself, you stop caring. Like it almost like kind of kills your dream, and you're just like, I'm over it. And it's like, it's not what you imagine to be, and you start contemplating dropping out. I finished luckily, but that's because I had a great support system. And even with my great support system, there were still times when I was just like, I am over this. And it gets crazy. And then even once I finished, I still fell into certain things as far as like student debt, which is why I think, which another thing I feel is very important is like fully and fairly funding the schools, especially, not only the K through 12, but also colleges and universities. And by doing that, that could help eliminate, education debt, student debt, as well as the transcript trap. I consider myself kind of lucky because if I do the math correctly, it costs about around 15,000 when you do like room and board. So I stayed on campus. I had a meal plan. That's sometimes depending on the dorm and everything you get at the university I went to. That's about $15,000. And then you have the classes. You have to pay for the classes and other fees. So I always say I consider myself lucky because I actually only owed about $26,000 when I finished school. So I was like, oh wow, I consider myself one of the lucky ones. But what I still stumbled at is I actually took out a loan from the university itself, and I did not realize that. And with that happening, I graduated from school. I didn't get a job out of school. I worked at McDonald's, so I was making like $8.90 an hour, and that's minimum wage. And then I worked there for a year, and then I went to Subway, and I was making $8.70 an hour. So I actually took like a pay cut, and with this loan that I had took out, I had to start, paying it back, and I was. But once the pandemic was like, in high gear, I remember recalling that they had suspended student loan payments, and for federal loans. And I remember being super happy because I was like, finally, I can stop paying this a bit and take this money and put it somewhere else. At the time, I was the only one working. My mom had been laid off. My sister had been laid off. We stayed in the house together. So they were getting unemployment, but that just covered the bills. And so I'm the only one working, and I'm working at Subway making minimum wage. It was not nearly enough. So when they cut that, when they suspended those payments, I was happy. However, I didn't realize at the time, it was only for the federal loans and not for the loan that I took out at Kent State. And so I remember waking up one morning and I look and I have an email, because I always check my email to see maybe a job contacted me or just anything really. And I have an email that states that my loan from Kent State has been sent to the Attorney General's office for collection, and I owe $5,000 immediately. And I immediately panicked because I was like, I don't have $5,000. I barely have the $75 to pay the internet bill right now. So it was kind of crazy, and I didn't even know they could do that until I learned a bit more about it. And I talked to my sister. She also went to Kent State, and she also went through sort of the same thing. And where I consider myself lucky is because when it happened, I immediately called the Attorney General's office. I had to leave a voicemail, which I also thought was kind of weird. But when it happened, after I called them, I was told I got a call back, and they was like, "Oh yeah, just call back in a week. It hadn't been put in our system yet." Before that next week, before I got the chance to call them, they actually called me. So, and I always say I consider myself lucky because I talked to someone, and they was like, "What we can do is we can have one your current loan servicer. They can actually absorb it into your other student loan." So that's something they did. So instead of me owing about like $26,000, I now owe over $30,000 in student debt. And I always say, I mean, and it's still like kind of crazy because I'm like, how am I going to pay over $30,000? But I still consider myself lucky because I know there are plenty of people who have their loans bouncing from one debt collector to the next to the attorney general's office. And during that time, it just builds and builds and builds and builds on the interest, which then by the time they actually start paying it, they can owe double or triple what they originally had to pay. So that's why I consider myself one of the lucky ones, but I also know there are some barriers that I face. I now know that at this point, grad school for me is out of the question. I won't be looking at grad school until I guess I can pay off this student debt. And that's for a lot of people. And I think that is something we have to look into because there are a lot of people who went to school, went to college, and they want to go to grad school. They want to get their master's or their PhD, but different things are hindering them for that, especially with debt. So I think by fairly and fully funding our schools, we could eliminate all the education debt, the transcript trap, and it will actually give all Ohioans, all the students a fair shot. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much. So we are done with our program and we have a question that came in. And so I'm going to read it. It is from John Reed at Gongwer. And he asks, caregivers, including child care and Medicaid providers for older Ohioans, face low wages and high burnout rates. What is needed to support them and those who need the services? So I think maybe that's a question.
I'll take that.
Oh,
I'll
okay,
take that, Kate.
perfect.
How you doing? Yeah, so what is actually needed? I mean, this is one of the things we have to have a real conversation, specifically when we talk about, I would say employers, and we're talking about, you know, the rates that people are getting, because again, during, and I would say for the last 2 budget cycles, being on the finance committee, I've, been asking people, do we actually know many of our caregivers, they're actually also on public assistance, or making a little bit to above public assistance to get some of the help that they truly deserve. And so I think this is one of those places where we need to have a very direct conversation about what are the profits that companies are making. And if you have employees who, again, are on various subsidies, we have to bring things back into just some alignment so that it is fair and equitable. Because again, doing the work of people and caregiving, whether it's our aging community or our babies, that is valuable work. And we need to be compensating people accordingly. There should be no reason where someone should have a long a long career in caregiving in its various forms. And then by the time you retire, you have nothing for yourself. That's shameful. So I think this is a direct thing of having open and honest and maybe even uncomfortable conversations of the profits that are happening in these fields, and looking at ways that we'll be able to better fund them so that the people who are truly the frontline caregivers are getting compensated appropriately.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
I mean, I just add to that I think that's true. Sorry, Wendy, I know you can jump in next. That's true of your county people too, right? Like so many of those services are directly provided, through local governments and through the various county boards that provide those sorts of services. So that's part of the conversation too, is making sure that those resources are flowing down so that we can, compensate people effectively from the employer side too, as local governments. It's not just about the other piece of that conversation, which is super important in the private sector, but that's true for us too in local government. So I just wanted to point that piece out.
I would like to add to that very quickly. I totally agree with the statements that were stated so far, but I would add in just a little bit where employers need to see their employees as a real person, where it's not just a matter that this person is of value because they're here from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., but also taking into account that is a mother who needs to get off maybe because her child is sick, and you're not going to penalize that mother for taking off because their child is sick. Or that is a mom that needs to make sure that she can come to her, or a father who needs to come to their child's parent-teacher conference because there's some real conflict that's going on with the school. So if anything, what this pandemic should have showed us is that there's so many people who had to leave the profession because they had to take care of their children. And so as we go forward, we need to have employers that see them as a whole person and not just the employee.
Thank you. And Wendy, did you want to add something?
I just want to say everyone that has spoken on this topic has told the real deal about the story that's out there. No one should work for a wage that doesn't allow them to live. We need a living minimum wage. Everyone who works has the right to a safe, modest, decent style of life. And that's what a living wage for the minimum wage would provide for us. And if we had a living wage at the minimum wage, the county employees, the social workers and so forth that are not making $15 an hour, the child care workers who are making $9 an hour, the home health care workers who are making between $8 and $10 an hour, they would have a living wage. And public policy and lawmakers control that.
Thank you so much. Now, if there are any other questions, you can raise your hand. I can take you off mute, or you can type them in the Q&A. Okay. I am not seeing any, but I do have a question. And my question would be, and I think each of the panelists could maybe answer this quickly because we are getting up to 12 o'clock. But what if there's one thing, the people's budget, like we showed, it has 7 demands, and underneath each of those demands, there are different policy recommendations to help get us there. What is the thing that, from your perspective, that we should be tackling first? What's the most urgent thing that needs to be done? And I guess I could start with, I could start with Representative House because she's in there. And
I would just say, I would definitely start off with funding our lives. You know, when you think about just, it is hard to live when you don't have kind of like basic necessities taken care of. And so the theme of like funding our lives for me would be a priority.
So tax overhaul, reforming our revenue. Excellent. So I'm just going to go down the line here, I guess. I see Tia. Tia's up next.
I hate to piggyback off the Representative House, but that really is, because once you have the economic, financial stability that you need, everything, your peace of mind comes where everything else follows in order. So if you're talking about childcare, if you know that your childcare is funded, even with your own financial income being more stable, then that's a worry that you don't have to take off the table, because you can do that. So you can make sure that you're taking the time to go back to school and get your education so you can further your career. But if you don't have that piece, that foundational piece set, then all the other, aspects that we're stating, they don't even come into play.
Thank you. And then next I see Brad.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, right, I'm going to say the same thing. Budgets are moral documents, right? And they're statements of priorities. And for too long, we have been, saying that the financial wellness of a very few is more important than the financial wellness of everybody in the state. And that's got to change if we're ever going to start moving our state forward.
Excellent. Thank you. Wendy, I see you next.
Based on a fair, balanced, and sufficient revenue system, I think we have an immediate crisis in Black maternal and infant health. And that's the most urgent, the flashing lights are on. We have got to address that. We should have addressed it 10, 20 years ago. That's the immediate thing we have to go to, is bring down that unconscionably high Black maternal health, the Black maternal death rate, and the Black infant death rate. Infant mortality is the international symbol of a quality of life of a people. It is unconscionable that Ohio's Black infant mortality is higher than many undeveloped countries of the world. We have to turn immediate attention to that based on a sufficient revenue system.
Thank you so much. And then Aki, you are next on my bar up top.
I would say it's a tie between the two when it comes as, most everyone said, a budget for like families, funding for families so they can have like financial stability, but also the Black maternal and paternal care, because this is something that I know that is something that I have heard about and a lot of people have struggled with. And I know even people in my own family have struggled with when it comes to like the maternal care and healthcare and that. So I think those are the two like major things that need to be tackled.
Thank you so much. And then I think Kalisha is our final panelist to answer this question.
Yes, it's definitely hard. So I'm gonna do like Aki and do top two. For me, of course, it's the mother mortality rate and also infant, but also our K through 12 funding. Just because growing up in an inner city, that the funding was like non-existent for our schools and has continuously declined. And my partner works in Dayton public schools, so I see like the struggle that these kids is going through every day. So it's definitely between those two for me. Because they say our kids are the future. So we need to one, keep the babies here, and then also make our kids adequate enough to survive through high school and college.
Yeah, I think there's a song or something that says our children are the future. I don't know. Anyway, I have really, really enjoyed this. And unless there are no other questions from the press, which I don't see any, I think we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to say thank you again for everybody for coming here, testifying, sharing your story. And I think we made a pretty solid case today for why Ohio needs to pass this people's budget and use the American Rescue Plan to reset and go in a different direction than the one we've been in. So everyone check it out online. It's All In for Ohio's People's Budget. And please sign up, get involved, and let's do this. Let's take the state in a different direction. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will see you around.